Alright guys, in today's video we're going to be talking about some more PlayStation 5 related information, and unfortunately I don't think this is the information that a lot of you were hoping to hear, but we do have to take some time to discuss it and go over it here. It has to do with a new patent that Sony filed that was recently discovered that clearly shows they are at least thinking about pushing microtransactions to a greater degree going into next generation. Obviously this is not exciting news, and I don't think a lot of people actually want to hear this, but we do have to discuss the bad news along with the good news and the good news with the bad news. That's just the way it has to be. But before going any further, if you could leave the video a like, it would really help it out. At the very least, if you just find it informative. I know that this isn't the news you want to hear, but keep in mind that hitting the like button only helps the channel out. It helps my content. Obviously, it's not a signal that we want microtransactions because I'm actually against them. So if anything, it's showing that you are against microtransactions and you are against Sony trying to implement something like this. And if you haven't hit the subscribe button, be sure to do that as well. But it says here, PlayStation 5 patent has some fans panicking that Sony is going to push microtransactions on players. Says there's an illustration from a PlayStation patent doing the rounds which suggests that Sony may be eager to push microtransactions on unsuspecting players. The diagram shows a user conversing with their console in a Alexa-esque scenario. In this example, the device reveals that 80% of players beat a particular boss using a specific type of in-game resource. It then allows you to acquire that item, presumably using either in-game currency or real money via the PlayStation Store. And I will try to have this image up on screen for you guys so you can see it yourself. This is actually the image that was discovered in the patent. This isn't massively different to the kind of system that exists in current games. You may find a race too difficult in Gran Turismo Sport, for example, so you'll have the option to buy a faster car with either in-game credit or cold hard cash. The system that the Japanese giant's patenting here pertains more to the data crunching that's going on behind the scenes. When a player queries the console, it's then able to compare your progress to the title's wider community and offer solutions. Presumably, developers would be able to tap into this technology and utilize it for any of their games rather than develop their own solutions as is currently the case. It's not the first time we've heard about a hypothetical PlayStation guide, as the platform holder has patented something similar to this in the past. In that previous example, it illustrated how certain in-game items could be highlighted on a map should the player ask where to find them. We already know that the Dualshock 5 will include a microphone to facilitate this kind of functionality on the PS5, and that there are unannounced features which will set the next-gen console apart from its predecessor. Of course, it's the microtransaction example which may prompt enthusiast gamers to push the panic button. Sony, of course, made over $12 billion from PlayStation Store purchases, much of which would have come from microtransactions in titles like FIFA and Fortnite, so it's not necessarily against the controversial practice at all. In this case, though, we believe some kind of PlayStation guide could be implemented in various practical ways, and yes, occasionally that may include recommending microtransactions. So here's the thing about this, guys. I'm not saying that we should be hitting the panic button because I don't think it's that serious. We know that a lot of patents don't actually ever see the light of day. The only thing that is concerning, though, however, is that Sony is clearly looking into this. This is something they're considering, and we could actually end up seeing this as a feature within the PlayStation 5. And I think that Sony could potentially get away with doing it depending on how they implement it, but the idea that they're going to try to push people, again, as this article highlights, we've seen publishers and developers find way to implement this into their games, and I'm just not a fan of it. I'm just not. I'm sorry. I'm not a fan of microtransactions. I understand that they exist in the gaming space and they're not going anywhere. I don't care about people who buy them. People are free to spend their money how they want, but one thing I can say that I am actually proud of Sony for doing, I'd say, for most of this generation, is trying to keep the traditional single-player experience alive. And part of that, in my opinion, is not ruining it or tainting it with unnecessary and potentially egregious microtransactions. I'm not saying this is pointing at that. This doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're going to do, because the truth is, yes, Sony does make a lot of money on microtransactions. And so Honestly, what I think this is mainly going to be for, and I do think this will be a real thing, and I don't think it's worth panicking over. I think the important thing this article highlights is that I think this is mainly going to be for like third-party publishers, and obviously whatever games Sony has that are going to have microtransactions, and then we know that Sony does have games with microtransactions. I believe The Last of Us Online is a good example of a game that had a really strong single player. That's what the game was known for, but they did have a multiplayer component that people liked, people loved, and it did offer microtransactions. Obviously, this is something that Sony's not a stranger to completely, but I think this is mainly going to be for like third-party publishers as a way to just streamline how they're going to be able to implement microtransactions. It is a little bit concerning to think that if you need help in a game, though, and you want to use your microphone that's built into the Dualshock 5, the first thing it's potentially going to jump to is, hey, buy this to progress. I don't like that. I don't like that. That's where that's borderline. You're talking about mobile gaming type practices where, oh, you want to progress, pay some money. I mean, I get that they're going to want that. I understand Sony is a business, and I understand that at the end of the day, they're just trying to make money along with all of these publishers and all of these other companies, but that's not me. I'm not running these companies. I'm not interested in how much money they make. I'm interested in how they're making the money. And as the consumer, I'm not a fan of microtransactions. I'm aware, again, that they're going to be there. They're not going anywhere, but I think Sony just needs to be very careful how they choose to implement this, because I'll tell you, again, this is not the information that we want to hear about. And the last thing I want to see is Sony go on stage, announce the PlayStation 5, and be like, oh, and here's how we're going to implement microtransactions on a UI level built in with the DualShock 5. And I think the feature itself, the idea that you can use the microphone and kind of interact with the PlayStation UI and ask questions and stuff is cool, but I don't want to see it become a predatory thing here that's just meant to push microtransactions. So again, not worth hitting the panic button just yet. It's not worth getting all worked up over, but it is something we do need to acknowledge, and at the very least, it does clearly show that Sony is definitely interested in microtransactions. We know they have been, but they might become a little bit more interested or show more interest than they have this generation. Hopefully that's not the case, though. But at this point, I'm going to ask you guys to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm going to be really interested to see what you guys have to say about this in particular. And again, be sure to leave the video a like if you did find it informative, or if you just enjoy the content here on the channel. Really helps it out. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and haven't already. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload. And feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.